we know that we have an audience of folks that have played lots of Diablo and are looking for a challenge. And so our second World Tier 2, and our first World Tier are available from level 1 when you first start playing the game. And you can select among them based on the amount of challenge that you want. And you can select, so the first tier adventure mode is tuned more for people who are new to Diablo, or people who just want to enjoy the story and not worry about the combat too much. You know, it's always a drag when you're engaged in the events that are happening and then you like die 10 times in a row. It really takes you out of that experience, right? So it's good to have that kind of mode. But for people who are looking for more of a challenge, we have that second mode. And then as you level up, and you get up to level 50, and you get through the campaign and you start getting into the later levels, because of course you can go up to level 100 is our level cap, you're going to progress through those additional world tiers. And those work somewhat more like the Diablo 3 world tiers or difficulties work, in that as your gear is progressing, and of course depending on how optimized your gear is in terms of efficiency, you're going to progress up through those world tiers, and that's going to set effectively how your kill rate of monsters, the rate of loot acquisition. And as you get up into those later world tiers too, in Diablo 4, you're going to get access to sacred and ancestral item tiers, which are higher tiers of items that have more exciting stuff. There's even a few items that are reserved for those later world tiers, a few unique.
And when a game that's like its core loop of Diablo is about progression, having a way to measure your progression, you know, through world tiers or in D3 was like through torment levels. Immortal, it's like going from Hell 1 to Hell 5. That idea that as you become more powerful, you want to challenge yourself, and then by challenging yourself, you get better loot, which means you get more powerful, means you want to challenge yourself. And so you kind of get into this, you want to be able to have that experience. And Diablo really shines when you find that sweet spot. Like oftentimes you'll get to a point where slightly underpowered, working your butt off, you get that amazing drop, now you're kind of into it, and then you get another amazing, now you're overpowered and everything's too easy, so now you need to ratchet up the difficulty so you get better. Now you're slightly underpowered again, you get into your sweet spot, slightly over, like, and that cycle is kind of really core to that feeling of progression in Diablo, and that's what the world tiers really give you, is that once you've sort of really dominated world tier 1 and you feel like I'm unstoppable and there's nothing that's really interesting anymore in terms of combat or loot, that there's a place to go to test yourself and get better loot against more challenging foes, and then same thing and go again. And so we find that things like the difficulty levels in D3 or the world tiers in D4 really allow that player that feeling of progression all the time, so they're constantly growing.
Yeah, let me just add too that on the later world tiers, we saw an opportunity to add a challenge that the world tiers culminate in, as it were. So at the end of, you know, tiers 3, 4, and 5, there's a boss that you can defeat in order to unlock the next world tier. And in fact, the last world tier, where you can gear all the way up to 100, has a boss at the end of it, which is extremely difficult. And that really provides something to stand up against with all of your optimized gear and say, like, all right, this is what I've been building toward, you know.
I love that, what Joe just talked about. I love that testing moment, you know, like in D3 you can change it from the menu anytime. From Immortal you just go to West March and you switch your difficulty. But that idea that, again, one of the reasons you become more powerful is to test yourself against harder challenges. So that notion that there's essentially a gatekeeper preventing you from World Tier 3, and you have to demonstrate your ability, and then you feel good about where you're, like, okay, if I can beat that boss, I'm ready for World Tier 3 and I can go into it comfortably or with some confidence. And I like that sort of, because again, especially that idea, like with Diablo 4 is going to have such a rich end game. We're getting ready for our end game beta, and there's so much to do from end of campaign to kind of getting to level 100. But knowing that out there is this level 100 boss waiting for you to get to the end of the end game, like that's something that's really going to motivate a lot of players. I know it motivates me to be able to go, if there's one thing I'm going to do in this game is I'm going to defeat the 100 boss, and fortunately, we have a lot of great ways through the Nightmare Dungeons and Helltide and PvP and all the things we can do after the campaign to allow us to prepare for that fight. Just that idea of getting into that world and feeling that progression, that movement, that you always know that you're going towards something, and you beat that next level of difficulty, or you get that new loot that gets that makes a build possible, so that you can actually go and because you always have that power fantasy. Like that's what I guess, back to what makes Diablo is everybody has a core power fantasy, and some people it's class based, where I'm board and sword, I'm a barbarian or sorceress or druid or what have you. But when you try to go in and you're like, okay, how do I play into that fantasy? Like, what legendaries do I need? What skills do I need? How does my tree play out? How does my paragon play out? Like, how do I build towards that? And that's one of the things I really love about D4 is that I think more than any of the previous Diablo games, there's just so much more choice in how you lean into that power fantasy. From what does your barbarian look like, or what does your sorceress look like? What are the skills that you're using and how you leverage them? The fact that you can pull legendary like affixes or abilities off of equipment and weapons and place them into other weapons, and it's really that all the permutations. You're not locked into, I'm looking for this set of boots. Okay, you found that boots, cool, but I'm going to actually put that on my sword because there's something else I want on my boots that's going to make this amplified in a way that you've never seen before, because you've never had that freedom before. And that's what I think is really cool, that from all those choices, that it's really going to feel like your power fantasy. It's your class, your character, your build. And even if we both play barbarians, they're both going to look very different. We're going to have very different builds, and they're going to play very differently because of the skill trees and the immense paragon boards that we can choose our path through those, which is going to be very different as well. Various legendaries is a big deal to take that because typically you go till they're all orange, right? Like you're playing, you go like, okay, blues are cool, yellows are cool. Okay, I got my orange, I got my legendary. But now that you have a great affix that you really love, like I want an extra skeleton cat mage to be a part of my army, and I can put that onto a yellow and turn it into a legendary. That really gives the player control, and the ability to figure out how to best optimize their build.